What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the dinner table. I hope everybody's having a good week. You ready to kick off the weekend, and you got a good jump start on November. But I don't really have too much for y'all in this week's intro, so I guess I'll kick y'all off with a little snippet of what this week's case is going to be about. And y'all already know how this goes. So go ahead and pour you up a glass of wine, pop you some popcorn, get comfortable, and let's get into this week's case. In October of 2019, a 19-year-old college student vanished after stopping at a gas station late one night in Alabama. Not long after she was reported missing, her car was found damaged and dumped in an apartment parking lot an hour away, and the interior was stained with her blood.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
This week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the murder of 19-year-old Aniah Haley Blanchard. Aniah was born June 22nd, 2000, to her mother Angela and her father Elijah Blanchard in Northport, Alabama. And for those who don't know where that is, it's about an hour outside of Birmingham. But June 22nd was also her mom Angela's birthday. So the fact that she gave birth to her baby girl on her birthday just made their bond that much more stronger and special. But she also had an older brother named Elijah Jr., and he was only 17 months older than her. So he and Aniah were best friends, very close in age, and they were always being seen together. And it was pretty common that people who seen them together and didn't really know who they were always assumed that they were boyfriend and girlfriend. But her mom, Angela, worked as a pediatric emergency room nurse in Birmingham, and her dad, Elijah, was a local businessman and pastor, so faith played a prominent role in their lives. But at some point, the family moved to Homewood, which is a little suburb of Birmingham, and it's only about a 10-minute drive from downtown. But sadly, in 2004, when Aniah was only 3 years old, her parents divorced. But she, her parents, and her brother all still remained really close. And both of her parents went on to get happily remarried. You see, Angela went on to marry a UFC fighter named Walt Harris. And Walt was actually a former college basketball player who signed to the UFC in 2013. But in 2019, he was ranked 9th in the world, and he was entered in the Hall of Fame. And his cage name was Big Ticket, so he was actually pretty legit. But Walt and Angela went on to have 2 more kids of their own, a son named Asia and a daughter named Ayla. And in Walt and Angela's household, there was no step nothing. Blood definitely couldn't make them any stronger, and he treated them like they were his own. And Aniah's dad, Elijah Sr., went on to remarry a prominent attorney in Alabama named Yeshiba Glenn. And she owned a law firm named Glenn Blanchard, and it's in the suburb of Birmingham. So she specialized in domestic violence relationships, adoptions, veterans law, and amongst a couple of other things as well. So both her parents and her step-parents were all actively in her life, and she was surrounded by a lot of love. So moving right along to her high school years, she attended Homewood High School where she played softball, and she was known locally in her softball community for always inviting the opposing team to the pitcher's mound for high fives and prayers after the game. So she was a very active force on her softball team. But like I said, her mom Angela was a nurse, and she worked mostly nights in the hospital. So during her free time, Aniah spent a lot of her time helping out Walt with her younger siblings. And thinking back on how Aniah used to help him out, Walt recalls he and Aniah being a great team. But in 2017, Elijah enrolled at Auburn University, and that very next year, Aniah enrolled at a community college, eventually wanting to transfer to Auburn to study childhood education. But in the meantime, she was just taking classes and she was working as a nanny. So not only did she go to school really close to her brother, but she also moved 10 minutes away from him in an apartment that she shared with her friend Sarah. So she and Elijah still saw each other and talked almost every day. But along with Aniah, when she went off to college, she brought her dog Blue, who she adored. And girl, I understand because I love my babies. But her friends remember the light that radiated from her smile and how she was just pure sunshine. Her mom described her as being a happy, loving, giving child who always put others first. On October 23rd, 2019, Aniah, Elijah, and their mom attended a funeral of a family friend in northern Alabama. But Aniah and Elijah had driven down from school and they couldn't stay too late because they had to be back in Auburn for work the next morning, which was almost a 200-mile drive or about a 2-hour drive. So that night, Aniah drove with Elijah home to Auburn. But they made a quick pit stop along the way, stopping in Homewood to see Walt and their other siblings. And Walt still regrets not telling Aniah to stay the night because he could tell she was tired. But he remembers he did ask her, and she promised that she was fine and she would just drop Elijah off at home and she was going straight home to go to bed. So Walt didn't press. He said his I love yous, he gave them hugs, he said goodnight, and they hit the road for their 2-hour drive back to Auburn from Homewood. Once back in Auburn, Aniah dropped Elijah off at his apartment. This is around 11 p.m. And remember, they were only about a 10-minute drive away from each other, about 3 miles. So she didn't have far to go at all after dropping him off. So about 9 minutes later, at around 11:09, Aniah's roommate, Sarah, texted her asking her if she was almost home. To which Aniah responds, yeah. But instead of going straight home, she makes a quick stop. But that part we'll come back to in just a second. So to add more context, Aniah and Sarah shared locations, and they always kept each other updated on their whereabouts. So this is so crazy because just like a couple cases ago with Irene Garza and how she was afraid of death, Sarah remembers that Aniah's biggest fear was being kidnapped and murdered. And Sarah says everyone who knew Aniah knew that was her biggest fear. And Elijah would go on to recall that Aniah rarely went anywhere alone, especially at night. But on this particular occasion, she did. About 30 minutes later, at 11:40, Aniah still hadn't made it home. So Sarah kind of jokingly texted her and asked her, "Did you go out without me?" And she responds, "I'm smoking a blunt, LOL." Now, Sarah's not that crazy roommate who's overprotective and overbearing and doesn't let their roommate do anything without them. She was like, okay, this is a little bit out of character for her because she never heard Aniah use the word blunt before. And she's like, okay, so who you smoking with? And Aniah responds, quote, Eric, I just met him. Now, 3 minutes later at 11:43, Sarah asked her where, but Aniah never responded. When Sarah checked the location of where Aniah's iPhone was, it had her location pinged at an apartment complex that was really close by, and a lot of other college students lived there as well. So Sarah just assumed that she had gone to this guy's apartment to hang out with him or to meet up with a couple of other friends. And in college, meeting somebody and going to kick it with them really isn't that uncommon. So she just went on to bed thinking that Aniah would be home shortly. The next morning at around 8 a.m., her mom, Angela, was taking her younger siblings to school, and she FaceTimed Aniah like she had done every single other morning. But Aniah didn't answer. Meanwhile, Sarah's just waking up, and she heads over to Aniah's room to hear about her night and to hear about this new air dude that she had mentioned the night before. But her room was still empty. But why? She always came home. So something wasn't right. And not only did she always come home, but she never left Blue alone overnight. So Sarah, thinking quick on her feet, she checked the location of Aniah's phone again. But this time, it was turned off. So Sarah's like, okay, this is a little bit odd, but I'm going to try another avenue. So she reaches out to a woman named Karina Thomas, who is the mother of the kids who Aniah nannied for. But Karina tells Sarah that Aniah didn't show up for work that morning. And this is alarming to the both of them because Aniah never missed a day at her nannying job, especially since she wanted to go into childhood education. She loved those kids. She would never just leave them hanging. She was the most reliable and responsible nanny Karina had ever had. So with this, her friend Sarah was not playing no games about her. She hopped in the car and just started driving around looking for Aniah's car. She calls Elijah to let him know about the situation, and she told him that she was really concerned. And you know, Elijah and Aniah are best friends. He's like, oh no, that's my sister. That's my heart. So he hops in the car expeditiously to go to meet Sarah at their apartment. And as Sarah's filling him in on what she knows about the situation, They both start to question, who is this Eric dude? So the next step Elijah does is to contact his mom and Walt. And after hearing that Aniah hadn't made it home the night before, they wasted no time. They hopped in the car and hit that 2-hour drive to meet Elijah so they can figure out where Aniah was. And as they're driving, Walt remembers this being the scariest, longest, and worst 2 hours of his life. And Elijah was on it. He reached back out to Karina to see if Aniah had shown up for work yet. And then they contact all of Aniah's friends, and they end up reaching out to one of her childhood friends named Hannah from back home. And when she caught wind of the disappearance, she also hopped in the car and drove 2 hours down to join the search. And after 24 hours had passed and no one had heard from Aniah, panic really started to set in. Because everyone who knew her all agreed that Aniah wasn't the type of person to just up and leave without telling anyone about her plans. She just didn't move like that. So the family pled with local news stations, and luckily they got the word out about Aniah's disappearance pretty quickly. But still, there was no sign of her. 2 days later, on October 25th, 2019, at around 6:15 p.m., someone spotted Aniah's black 2017 Honda CR-V parked in an apartment complex over 50 miles away in Montgomery, Alabama. And finding her car brought absolutely no comfort to those who were searching for her, especially her parents, because her car was damaged and there was still no sign of her. So ribbons and bows in her favorite color were decorated around the entire town, and everyone in the community came together to find her. And Angela and Walt would go off to search on their own because they just had to find their baby girl. They searched Auburn, Tuskegee, which is about a half an hour southwest of Auburn. But the two of them took Walt's truck and they would go on to search dense forests, and they covered miles of areas, and they still couldn't find Aniah. And award money started to pour in from all over, including from UFC President Dana White. So Dana White and light heavyweight champion John Jones both contributed $25,000 in reward money to find Aniah. While police didn't reveal publicly what they found in Aniah's car, they did say that due to the state of the interior of the car, it definitely seemed like a struggle took place. And this is when they started to zero in on foul play. Thankfully, the local federal agencies were working diligently to find Aniah. And after learning that her cell phone had shut off in an area near Clarion Inn, which wasn't too far from her house, surveillance cameras were checked in the area, and this is when detectives got a break in the case. So with their surveillance footage, police discovered that Aniah had stopped at a Chevron gas station on College Street, right in Auburn, and only about a 2-minute drive from her apartment. And according to the video, Aniah went into the Chevron gas station at around 11:21 p.m., and she was only in the store for about 2 minutes. And she only went in the store to buy a bag of sour cream and onion chips and a drink. Her mom would go on to say that this was her favorite midnight snack. She had to have a bag of chips and a drink before she went to bed. And y'all remember, only about 11 minutes prior to this, she was texting her roommate telling her that she was almost home. So she was just running in the store really quick. So if anything, she should have been at home between 11:25 and 11:30 at the latest. 2 weeks after her disappearance, police announced they had a person of interest. And this is a man who was captured on the surveillance footage during the same time when she was going in the store to grab her little midnight snack. And to solidify their claim on this suspect, a witness who was at the gas station that night came forward and told police that they thought they remembered seeing a man forcing Aniah into her car while she was parked at the gas station parking lot. And the suspect that allegedly abducted her is a man by the name of Ibrahim Yazid, not nobody named Eric. And Yazid was a 30-year-old man from Montgomery, Alabama, where Aniah's car was found. So police were very confident that he was definitely involved in Aniah's disappearance, and they issued a warrant for his arrest, and they announced that he was dangerous and likely armed. Now, the reason that they told the public that he was dangerous and likely armed wasn't just something off of a whim that they were like, you know what, this is a black man, let's just assume that he's dangerous and armed. No. The reason for this was because he had an extensive criminal record. Ibrahim Yazid had been in jail up until recently when this case took place, and he was released on bond, and he was still awaiting trial for his involvement in a crime that happened in February of 2019. You see, he and a woman named Jessie Ford were arrested for attempted murder after a 77-year-old man was found beaten and left for dead in his car. And police discovered this 77-year-old man because they had actually pulled over somebody else for erratic driving. And according to police, he was, quote, unconscious, unresponsive, and severely injured and near death in the parking lot of a hotel. Ibrahim and this Jessie Ford had robbed this 77-year-old man, and after beating him, they left him for dead. So, just based off of that situation alone, they deemed Ibrahim to be pretty violent. And they were also responsible for holding another person against their will during the same time. They beat them and they stole from them as well. And it wasn't just these crimes. Ibrahim had a rap sheet dating all the way back to 2011. When he was about 22 years old, he was arrested for armed robbery. And that following year in 2012, when he was 23, he was arrested for attempted murder when he intentionally rammed his car into the back of a police vehicle. Now, all 4 of these charges were eventually dropped, but it didn't stop there. In 2013, he was charged with possession of marijuana, crack cocaine, drug paraphernalia, possession of carrying a pistol without a warrant, as well as attempting to elude law enforcement. And in 2015, he was indicted for those charges. And in 2 separate hearings, he received 2 13-month sentences. However, those charges ended up being suspended and he never served any time. So then in 2017, he was charged with aggravated assault, battery of another officer, possession of marijuana, and fleeing police. And despite a 16-month sentence for these charges, he was released after only serving 8 months. So Buddy was really out here about it. So finding out that this man who was kind of violent was potentially involved in Aniah's case, the police chief of Auburn comes forward and he gives a statement. He says, quote, "We don't have any reason to know that she was familiar with him, but we can't rule out completely that there was some knowledge." So being that he had served time for the crimes that he committed, and at the time they believed that he was probably homeless after being released from prison this last time. So they believed that he was staying at a hotel near the Chevron station where Aniah was abducted. And this was only about 2 minutes away from her apartment. So all very close to these college students. And we don't know if Aniah and Ibrahim had any type of communication or even knew each other prior to seeing each other at this gas station. But investigators did find out that they were attending the same community college. So later on that night after she was abducted, Aniah's car was seen at a different nearby gas station, and this is where they see Ibrahim get out of her car and go into this gas station and buy a cigar. Then, an hour later, a license plate reader clocked Aniah's car at the entrance of I-85 highway heading south towards Montgomery. Now, after an arrest warrant was issued for Ibrahim, Angela came forward and she pled with him publicly. And of course, she was still holding on to hope that her baby girl was alive. She says, quote, "As a mother and as a Christian, you know we're all sinners. And even though this man has done some evil things and possible evil things to our daughter, you know God can change everybody's heart. If he sees this, whoever it is who has done harm to our child, it can be okay. You can stop now. You can change this. You can let her go. God forgives you. We forgive you. We just want our child home and safe." And the very next day after Angela pled these words, on Thursday, November 7th, 2019, Ibrahim's little dirty black ass was found hiding out in the woods near Pensacola, Florida. And this was about 200 miles away from where Aniah was last seen on surveillance footage in Auburn. So his little dusty ass was arrested for first-degree murder of kidnapping of 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard, and it was reported by police that this man did not surrender peacefully, because the very next day when he appeared in court, he had a fat-ass swollen eye, which he claimed the police gave him. And I'm not even gonna lie to you, I would have knocked him upside the head my damn self, so I'm not even gonna try to say nothing about the police beating on black people in this situation. He deserved it. So now, after having him arrested, he's in custody. He's been charged with what he's been charged with. The police felt comfortable releasing the results of the interior of Aniah's car that they found. And it was a lot of blood. But they also found male DNA. So, testing it to see if it matched Ibrahim's, they found a match. And they went on to explain that the passenger seat of her car contained an excessive amount of blood, and that the door behind the passenger seat contained a bullet.
And today we learned the reason the judge ordered Yazid to submit that DNA sample is because the Alabama Department of Forensic Science determined male DNA was found in Blanchard's car, and the state wants to compare his DNA with the one found inside the car. The judge also denied a motion to consider Yazid's bond and found probable cause to send this case to the grand jury. Now, to get into some of those new details talked about in court this morning. First off, when Yazid walked into the courtroom, he looked at Blanchard's family and simply shook his head. Investigators with the Auburn Police Department say Yazid walked into the Auburn convenience store where Blanchard was last seen first and spotted her from inside. Then they say a witness saw Yazid forcefully put Blanchard into her SUV and drive off with her inside. When that witness was later questioned, police say he broke down in tears because he felt remorseful for not speaking up sooner. Last week, Yazid's attorney filed a motion for his client to be granted bond, but the district attorney argued that should not happen.
Now, despite all the evidence stacked against him, there was still no body. So Ibrahim maintained his innocence. And that following week, Angela and Walt went to Dr. Phil to plead for answers. Then on November 22nd, a month after Aniah went missing, police shocked the community when they arrested a second man connected in Aniah's abduction and murder. Now, this particular man was also a convicted felon. So in 2004, the man that we're talking about, his name is Antoine Fisher. Crazy, not like the movie, because this Antoine Fisher was arrested and convicted of the murder of 25-year-old Amy Rawls, who lived in the suburbs of Montgomery. So apparently it was a drug deal gone wrong. And the other man involved in this crime was currently still serving time in Alabama State Prison. And surprisingly, Antoine served less than 2 years for this crime. So in 2019, 35-year-old Antoine was released on a $50,000 bond for his involvement in Aniah's abduction and possible murder. But he provided the police with information to allow for his release. So the investigators suspected that he helped Abraham dispose of evidence. So they hoped that by working with him, this would lead to the discovery of her body. So he made a deal. And after he was released on bail, police agreed to drop the charges against him if he started talking. So he did. And according to Antoine's account, Abraham called him in the early morning hours of October 24th. And then he showed up in Montgomery asking for help driving Aniah's car. So Antoine, being a good friend to Abraham, he decides to help him out. He didn't know the extent of the situation. So he ends up following behind Abraham in his own truck to the very same apartment complex where investigators found Aniah's car. He says then they wound up at the cemetery behind a church, and Antoine noticed that there was a large object wrapped in a comforter in the back of the Honda CR-V, which we now know was Aniah. So Antoine remembers saying, quote, "Tell me that's not a body." But Abraham is like, "Chill, bro, chill. It won't come back to you or your family. Don't even worry about it." He says Abraham then drops the object that they had been transporting in the woods. But Antoine is steady asking for answers, like, "Bro, what do you have me out here doing?" And Abraham simply says, "I shot a girl. She went for my gun and I had to shoot her." And we all know that by saying this, he's trying to lead the investigators to believe that Aniah reached for his gun, supposedly. So he then uses this opportunity to try to defend himself. He takes the gun back and he shoots her. And cousins, listen to this. 3 days later, on November 25th, police arrested a third man in connection to Aniah's disappearance. And this man's name is David Johnson Jr. So he didn't actually have any connection to Aniah's murder itself, but he was arrested for hindering the prosecution of Ibrahim Yazid. But this David dude was allegedly the one who drove Ibrahim across state lines to Florida, allowing him the ability to avoid being apprehended. And then not only that, but he lied to police when he was questioned. I mean, be down for your friends, I understand. But listen, don't come over here looking for a getaway driver, a place to hide. No, because if they come over here looking for your black ass, they already know you're here. And I'm just going to tell. I'm not about to go to jail for you. No, no, no. He's right over there in that closet right there. Yep, that one right there. That same day, on November 25th, police came across human remains in the woods of Macomb County, Alabama. And this county is between Auburn and Montgomery. Now, during the discovery of the human remains, there were items of clothing discovered nearby, including a pair of Sorel boots. Now, initially, detectives weren't sure if it was in fact Aniah, so they needed to wait for further testing. But in the meantime, they did call Angela and Walt down to the DA's office to see if they could identify any of the clothing that was found nearby. Ugh, and this part just breaks my heart. Those Sorel boots that they found had actually been a gift from Walt to Aniah when they went to New York City. So when they seen the picture of those boots, they recognized them instantly. After seeing the boots, the DA remembers Walt quietly excusing himself and then going into the stairwell of the building, screaming and punching the concrete wall, just overwhelmed with grief. And Angela pled with him, "Please let me see my daughter, please." But she was still not allowed to see her baby girl's remains. Angela and Walt were then taken to the spot in the woods where police had located Aniah's remains, and they searched the area looking for more clues that can be used as evidence. So now that investigators had her body, they could now compare the crime scene, which they believe, based on the amount of blood that was found in her car and the injuries to her body, investigators could conclude that she was killed by a gunshot wound. And on December 2nd, 2019, the DA announced that Ibrahim's charges had been upgraded to capital murder and they were going to be seeking the death penalty. In total, he's now facing 3 counts of capital murder, including 1 count of capital murder during a kidnapping in first degree, 1 count of capital murder during a robbery in the first degree, 1 count of capital murder involving a victim in a vehicle, and this was the first day that the public was made aware of Aniah's cause of death, which was officially determined to be the result of a gunshot wound. A medical examiner ruled that Aniah was killed in a manner of homicide. Cause of death was a gunshot wound. So with what little evidence that we do have and the testimony that we have from the witnesses, we're only left to piece together what we believe happened to Aniah. Now, the exact time frame of her death, we don't know, but we can piece together that she dropped her brother off at his apartment at around 11. She started texting her roommate at around 11:09. She entered the store at around 11:21, and she was only there for about 2 minutes tops. And then at 11:40 to 11:43, she was texting Sarah saying that she was with somebody that she met named Eric. So all of this happened within less than an hour. And by the time Sarah was getting texted back from Aniah's phone, we don't know if she was dead already or what. But investigators, as well as her family, do have strong feelings that this was not Aniah texting Sarah back. So on December 2nd, 2019, the DA announced that they believe Ibrahim was responsible for the death of 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard, and he was being charged with both kidnapping and murder. But this little dusty man continued to fight for his innocence, which, as we all know, meant that he was going to take this case to trial. But y'all, this is so freaking crazy because this was also going on during kind of the pandemic era. And not only that, but while this didn't necessarily affect the course of the trial, in the summer of 2021, the district attorney, Brandon Hughes, who was actually in constant contact with Aniah's family, assuring them that he was going to get a conviction for Aniah's murder. Well, yeah, about that. He was suspended from practicing law. You see, this man was accused of 7 felony counts, including 5 ethics violations, 1 count of conspiracy, 1 count of perjury, And another claim against him alleged that he had embezzled $14,000 to pay hush money to a female employee that he had assaulted. Like, what the heck is going on? And despite all of this, like I said, the pandemic was going on, so this also slowed down the prosecution of Ibrahim. And he was still being held without bond, and he was awaiting trial. But thankfully, like I mentioned earlier, prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. And as far as Antoine Fisher, all of his charges were dismissed on December 17th, obviously for his participation in bringing down Ibrahim and discovering Aniah's remains. But unfortunately, Ibrahim's trial was pushed back yet again. So right now they're saying that he can go to trial sometime in the spring of 2025. And although the exact date hasn't been set, last year in March he did plead not guilty to all 3 counts of capital murder. And since being arrested in 2020, he definitely has not kept his peace while he's awaiting trial because he has absolutely tapped on a couple of extra charges to the original capital murder charges that he already had. And I will definitely be keeping y'all posted on what happens in his trial next year in 2025. But Aniah's family was not going to let her death be in vain, because in June of 2020, a bench was placed in Patriot Park in Homewood in honor of her. A scholarship was also established at her high school in her name, and in November of 2022, Alabama residents voted for Aniah's law, which would push for stricter bail requirements for violent offenders. Angela also started Aniah's Heart Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization set out to educate people, especially young women, about personal safety and self-defense. And y'all, that is the end of this week's case. These text me when you get home cases always break my heart. But whatever platform you're listening on, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And make sure you're following me on whatever platform you listen to your podcast on so that you can get alerted whenever I drop new episodes every Friday. And as usual, I'll see y'all same place, same